here's the prediction from Mike Glover, who runs fieldcraftsurvival and does this for a living, looking at preparedness, looking at threats. It's my academic experience. It's also my counterterrorism, counterintelligence experience. During the election cycle, we will see a massive disruption, and on election night, prior and after, you will see what feels like civil war, and you
mean in the next few months?
In the next few years.
Okay.
Because we're going to have a lead up. Yeah. All the social media platforms are going to start getting leverage. The troll farms from China, Russia, North Korea's influence will start affecting us like it did with BLM and Antifa and the election cycle. And what you're going to see up is a lead up of tension. And what you're seeing is politicians irresponsibly weaponizing government agencies and people. And what you're going to see, especially in heavy populated areas, is what looks like a civil war. You're going to see, imagine this scenario. You have Antifa and BLM who comes out like they did, and they start burning down the streets. Except now you're going to have the right fringe who's going to come out and go, we won't accept this.
It's not just that. Yeah. During the Summer of Love, locals, just apolitical people were seen standing on their street corners with rifles.
100%. So then you have this imbalance where you have leftist extremists, right-wing extremists, and then the people in the middle just defending what they own, their families, their friends, their communities. And then all of these things are happening, and then it starts bleeding into the outskirts. It starts affecting everybody. But what happens when the law enforcement officers are caught in the middle? Now, are they not supposed to defend their lives? They're in the middle of an active gunfight. So take the Rittenhouse situation and amplify that in a full skirmish, where the battlefield are the streets of densely populated areas like Chicago, where you come from.
So you've seen V for Vendetta?
Yes. Yeah.
I want to just think of that scene at the end where the guy says, eventually someone will do something stupid. And it shows the finger man, the cop, shoot the little girl. All of the local residents just walk up with weapons and they go after that cop. And then it camera pans up and he goes, they're no longer going to tolerate law enforcement. I think it won't be over something like that. But you'll get to the point, like you mentioned a Rittenhouse situation. We've already seen circumstances where people have beaten cops, where cops are caught in a riot. And then if it gets to the point where these rioters are unscrupulous and just literally don't care anymore, then you're going to get a V for Vendetta-like situation. There will be a riot. The cop will come out and he'll be telling people to get away. They won't. He'll fire probably a less lethal, and then they'll just start clobbering on them. So we often talk about, particularly with people who've experienced war, our friend Forrest Cooper mentions the people who are trained in war and who've experienced it are the ones begging you to stop because they don't want to see this happen. I've not been in war. I've been in civil conflict and unrest, so precursors too. The worst thing I've seen was people in Egypt shooting at each other with makeshift. They had these pistols that were like 12. They were 12 gauge, I think, and they were single shot. You break barrel, break action, put it in, close it, bang. And from atop the Hilton, I watched someone get shot, killed, and then their body was carried away. That was the one time in this reporting I've seen someone just deliberately be killed in front of me. Not in front of me, like very relatively close, but I was high up, so I was safe. We were all pretty safe. And that experience was like having covered some of the unrest, riots, fires. I was on West Florissant and Ferguson when they were burning down the entirety of that whole block. You drove your car down the street. The fires were so intense. In your car, it felt like the fire was right in front of your face. Seeing that and knowing that's not even warfare, I can't imagine, I'll just ask you, what do you think the average person would do if they actually were, forced into the fray of people engaging in a firefight in their neighborhood or something? Yeah.
So, war tends to be a complex thing, but in the primal, the ancestral version of it, it's very simple. I mean, it's very simple. It's violence, it's chaos. The people who are trained for war, my peer group who are trained for war, go into war with intent, meeting task, purpose, and objectives. And so when you have that and you understand what that is, it's demonstrated in this idea of art of war, right? We understand how to operate in war. People who are so fragile, they can't change their tire. In a fender bender, they lose their mind. A simple emergency trauma, they lose their mind where somebody actually pays for their life when something so simple could have been done. that's the world we live in because we're living in that.
You know what's really crazy to me? So when I did the hostile environment training, they had to explain to people how to apply a tourniquet and to put it over the wound. So like they did, they said, okay, so we have a dummy here. He's got a bleed in his leg. And people were like, where does a tourniquet go? They would put it under, and they're like, it has to go above. And I'm like, yes, otherwise it's not stopping the blood.
In between the heart and the wound.
Yeah, I don't understand. It was crazy to me that people didn't understand that. We actually had one guy, when they showed a video of a femoral bleed, he fainted. And then I was just thinking to myself, like, what would have happened to this guy? You know, he's in his neighborhood. Violence, war, conflict breaks out. We're in such a safe era here in the United States. If he saw a modicum of the violence that our troops had experienced, he'd be on the battlefield and he'd look down and just collapse. Like that to me is it's just bonkers.
Yeah, I did, I deployed all over the world, in Yemen, Afghanistan, Iraq, Pakistan, Libya. And a lot of the things that people deal with in those countries, they deal with because that's the way life is. A byproduct of freedom is complacency. And it always has been, because we optimize our life in this democracy and this sovereignty, and it makes our life really easy, but it also makes us very weak. And there is a very specific percentage of the country from my peer group who knows what warfare is, and then there's the rest of society. One of the reasons we started Fieldcraftsurvival is to teach civilians about worst case scenarios, because if you train for the worst case, you're prepared for everything in between. Don't train for the best case, train for the worst case.
The crazy thing to me is how to convey that experience of actually watching, violence and trauma to an individual, so they understand why it's so important to be prepared. Look, there was a story about a club, a fire broke out, and everyone immediately ran to the door, and they all jammed themselves in it, and then I think like people died. And there's a video where a guy, when everyone's running and screaming, calmly walks to the fire exit in the back next to the stage and just walks out. You know, I've always known this my whole life, and maybe it's because my dad was a Marine, or as a firefighter, actually. And he would say, no matter where you are, whenever you go in a building, wherever you are, know your exits. And so my whole life, like we'd walk in, I'm a little kid, and he'd be like, where's a fire exit? And I would look around, like, it's right there. And he goes, you got it. And then I hear these stories of people who are so unprepared and so complacent. They don't even understand how to leave a building when the smoke alarm goes off. Let me tell you a story, man. I worked for Fusion, which is the ABC Univision joint venture, no longer exists. I'm in the New York office. And it was really, really nice office. They had desks, and then they also had these little diner chairs they had set up. So you could sit in a comfy little chair at a table with your friends and talk. And so I'm sitting there with my computer, and I'm with my producer who was working with me. All of a sudden, the bright lights start going off, wah, 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 full blast. I grab my computer and the plug. I put under my arm. I get up, jump out of the table, and I look over, and she's just sitting, and I'm like, come on, let's go. And she's like, what? I'm like, the alarm's going, let's go. And then she grabs her stuff, and then I look over at everybody. I'm like, yo, let's go. And there's 50 people just sitting there, all look at me. And then I'm like, I ain't waiting. I get out of the building. We were on like the third floor. I go outside. I'm standing outside. I get asked, like, what's going on? I'm like, the fire alarm went off. You get out of the building. What do you? And then nobody else came out. Fire trucks pull up. This is in New York. 2 trucks pull up. All the firefighters jump out, run inside. And then a few minutes later, one by one, the employees all start walking outside, going like, what's happening? What's happening? And then I was like, did you guys seriously stay in the building when the fire alarm went off and you're on, it was like a 5-story building or something, like the 3rd floor? Turns out there was some kind of gas leak or fire threat. And it's just remarkable to me that these people were so comfortable, the fire alarm literally did not persuade them to get out of the building. That's what scares me when we talk about all of this stuff, the potential for conflict, is that I have witnessed people sit in a building with the fire alarms going off full blast. Before this happened, this is crazy, we were in a different building. The power goes out. The speakers go on. This is an emergency situation has arisen. Remain calm. Stay in the building. And I was like, nope. And I got out of the building. Everybody else stayed. Turns out there was a leak in the basement that had made contact with an electrical system, caused a short, huge fire risk, and they didn't want anybody rushing to the doors and panicking and leaving. So they all just sat there using battery power on their laptops, and I left the building and went to a cafe to work. I've seen so much of this, man. I was in Ferguson. I'm with the guy. He's a veteran field reporter. He's fired fully automatic guns. He's been in war and conflict. He's got legit body armor. And they make the announcement that Darren Wilson will not be indicted or something like that. And then all of a sudden, we hear bang, 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 bang. I'm on the ground. I look to my right, dude's on the ground, and I'm like, my man. I look to my left, and there's a guy from ABC standing there looking around going, those fireworks? And I'm like, get down. And then he's like, what's happening? I was like, do you see anybody with fireworks? No. Do you see guns? Okay, dude. It's crazy to me, man, when you're put in these situations, and I'm not even talking about war. I'm like, just street violence, riots and stuff, but to see how people act when this stuff goes down.
I imagine like in the heat of the chaos, there's very little you can do to convince uneducated people about it. So is this why like you're doing this now? So people ahead of time, like I was thinking last night, like, okay, I've been in emergency mode for like weeks. It just strikes me like, what if there's an active shooter? What if there's a fire? I should have a plan with my neighbors, with my environment. So what steps from start to finish if someone were to experience like an emergency, a life-threatening emergency?
Yeah, so all the things you're describing when we talk about worst case scenarios, whether it's natural, man-made disaster, has to do with stress. They're all like a catastrophe is actually a stressful event, just short in duration of time, but elevated in the actual volume of stress that you get. So a lot of people aren't prepared for mild stress. And, you know, I make the joke, like, if your girlfriend texts you and says, hey, I saw you liking those girls' yoga pants videos on Instagram, how do you react? A lot of people are like, oh, what are you talking about? And they get angry and emotional and they don't know how to react. Their palms sweat. And that overreaction is a correlation to high-grade stress, how you're going to react to high-grade. So a lot of people in our society, they use groupthink as a psychology tactic, which they don't know they're doing. But it's like, if that person's not moving, why would I move, right? So we're all sheeple, right? We're just not doing anything. So the idea is like, identify the threat, observe, pay attention to what it is. But like Tim said in a couple of examples, physical displacement from the X or the crisis is the best way to survive. So break your physical body up and away, create distance, time, and as many obstacles as you could put in between. But because we're curious, we want to catch everything for the gram. We're like, what is that noise? Is that firecrackers? Let's walk out with a phone and catch this on my story on Instagram and then get potentially shot in the face.
Not just that, but I've seen these veteran journalists, they do no training and they go into hostile environments and they put everybody at risk.
Yes, it happens all the time. I've seen it too. I've seen it live in war with journalists that were with us. Man. Sebastian Junger is a good example. One of his best friends, who was a cinematographer on Restrepo, when he went, was hit by an RPG in Libya and killed. Not saying they did the wrong thing, but that's the potential risk to your life. Our society is very fragile, very weak, and if you're not getting prepared now, then you should be.
When you say make distance and time from the X, from the tragedy, or from the I guess emergency, are you saying like physical? So this is a fire. You want physical distance, but you also want, when you say time, what is that? Like you want water that'll make the fire take longer to get to you? You want to
create, in the distance, which is correlated to time, you want to create a gap space in getting off the X. The proximity, which a lot of the indications of a catastrophe we sense, obviously, we through sound, smell, taste, whatever it is, we feel it. Even intuition. We're like, hey, something might be wrong. Follow your intuition. One of the reasons why so many people are getting killed is because we're complacent, but that relates to our laziness. It's like the idea of like, you're in bed watching Netflix with your spouse. You hear a loud noise downstairs. What do you immediately do? You write it off. You're like, oh, that's probably the cat. Honey, we don't have a cat. Oh, it's the neighbor.
House is settling.
The house is settling. Get off your ass and physically assess the situation. So if you hear fireworks, oh, that's fireworks. If it sounds like gunshots, start moving and then figure it out on the way out, and then read about it on the news. But don't take the chance that something's going to happen. And then that's obviously the first part. The second part is the technical proficiency you need, and then also the inoculation of stress. Most people forget that, like, if I teach you to apply a tourniquet, take you 3 minutes. I mean, it's not hard.
You got a pen.
Yeah, it's a pen, a belt, material, an actual tourniquet that costs $29.95 on fieldcraftsurvival.com. It's not expensive. But you get that tourniquet. What we're forgetting in technical proficiency is there's this inoculation, suppression of stress, which means you're likely going to be in a sympathetic nervous response, fighting and flighting. Your body primarily wants to move. So you have to be able to technically react and do those things while under stress. We don't have anything in our society besides jiu-jitsu, combat sports, sports, period, that allow us to do that. But what are we seeing? We're seeing woke culture making us more soft because it's everybody gets the participation.
Yeah, one thing that stuck with me for a long time is this story I read. I was told when I was younger. Somebody in my neighborhood, these guys got into a fight. Some guys beat up some guy. A few days later, a guy B beats up guy A. A few days later, guy A's friend C guys B, and they run up and start wailing on him. And then all of a sudden, in the middle of the pummel, one of the dudes pulls out a knife and goes 1-2 right in the chest of the dude they're beating up. The other two guys go, whoa, dude, and pull him back like, what are you doing? Like, we were just beating him up. They ask the guy, are you okay? And he's like, yeah, I'm fine. And he gets up and runs, turns the corner, and drops dead. They hit his lung.
Yeah.
And it was crazy when I learned about sucking wounds. I think that's right? Yeah. How simple it would have been to save that guy's life. Relatively simple. I mean, I don't know. I'm not an expert on how to. I know you can do the trick with like plastic wrap and tape on 3 sides, but couldn't they have just he could have stuck his finger in it or plugged it or something? And
well, it's so your chest cavity, your chest wall is very fragile, to say the least. You take a puncture wound in the chest, you're going to collapse a lung because the negative pressure and your lung collapses because it needs that pressure. What you're doing in the chest seal is you're applying it to that laceration where you've been compromised in your chest cavity, and it's re-establishing the balance in that pressure. What sounds like, to me, that situation is he hit something that's vital. So he hit something in the pump house. He might have nicked an artery, bled internally, which in that case, he would need a chest tube, or he would need upgraded levels of care, and there might not have been a thing he could have done for him.
So thanks for checking out this segment from the Timcast IRL podcast. But if you want to check out the full show live, tune in Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. And if you want more special access content, head over to timcast.com and become a member. Your membership helps sustain this company, keep our journalists employed, makes this show happen, and you will get access to exclusive members-only segments of the Timcast IRL podcast, and there's a massive library to check out. So again, go to timcast.com or tune in Monday through Friday at 8 p.m., and we'll see you all there.